This is an Empty Closet Radio podcast. Get more at facebook.com/emptyclosetradio.
Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sam.
And this is The Empty Closet.
The show for everyone, whether you're in the closet
Or out and proud.
or somewhere in between.
You're in The Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. Now, Sam's away gallivanting in Melbourne, so I've got a special guest presenter in here with me. Special guest anyway. His name's Darren. We're going to catch up with him and find out all about different types of relationships, different types of sexuality. If you would like to catch up or follow along with any of the discussion today, make sure you check out our social media pages. Just search for Empty Closet on your favorite social media. Hit the like button or the subscribe button or the follow button, and you'll be kept up to date with all of our latest stuff. If you have a podcasting app, make sure you search for Empty Closet Radio, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be kept up to date with all of the latest from the Empty Closet. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
Empty Closet Radio. Listen to us using your TuneIn radio app on your smartphone. Very smart.
101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. Sam's on holiday, so I've enlisted a new temporary guest in the closet, Darren Ramsay. Thank you so much for coming into the closet. I know that you're very busy working as a columnist with FNQ magazine, so we're very happy that you've been able to spare the time to come into our lovely studio, which is actually just my balcony, to share some of your experience with us. Tell us a little bit more about kind of how it is that you got involved in writing for FNQ.
Thank you, Andrew. And it's a pleasure to be here too. And it is a very lovely studio to be sitting in. As far as writing for FNQ magazine, that really kind of came about being fairly new to Cairns. I've only been here for just over 18 months. So I moved up from down south, lifestyle change as people do, and Cairns has been a space I've been vacationing for quite a long time, so it's a great spot to be. I arrived here, decided to link into the community and went looking for things like gay-owned cafes, all the places where the LGBTIQ plus community hang, kind of get around the people that I relate to and resonate with, and stumbled across the Paradiso Cafe. Just got chatting with the guys who own that place, and lo and behold, of course, there's the FNQ magazine is one of what the partners do there. So we began chatting again, and basically I've been writing for quite some time, have a few books published out there on different topics in and around relationship styles and so forth, and just decided that maybe I can offer something to the local community up here in Cairns with some of the things I've experienced over time. So that's how it came about.
And so one of the things that you really bring some perspective, I guess, to the community is around poly relationships. And we're going to talk more about that later, about what a poly relationship might look like. But kind of how did you get into relationship coaching, and was your relationship coaching and authoring these books, was that all around poly relationships, or is it a bit wider than that?
Yeah, it's certainly a bit wider than that, and it's kind of like the part of the journey of where it all began was for a better part of 2 decades I lived the traditional kind of monogamous relationship, heterosexual, picket fence, 2 kids, dog, cat, you know the story. And when that relationship fell apart, I literally began questioning myself, what I really wanted out of a relationship. And that's when I decided I would go exploring a few different things about myself. Just took a really good look at myself, what I wanted out of life, and sat back and said, well, what didn't work in that traditional type of relationship I had? And in that, learnt a lot about myself. And so began that part of my journey, which has led to me writing about it, as you mentioned, coaching and helping people about it. I did that for almost 10 years. Part of moving to Cairns was, in fact, a lifestyle change, so a career change came with that. But in the meantime, it was looking at what was it about the traditional relationship that didn't work for me. And when I dug deep inside, what I found was there was more to me than was masked or hidden by the expectations of what we've taught at school. You're taught to get a job, get a partner, get married, have kids, and all that kind of very typical stuff. And then, hey, there's nothing wrong with that for when that's right for the individual person. And I tried it on for nearly 20 years, successful at doing that bit, but it just kind of came to an end when the kids began to get older, and I began to realise, like I said before, there's more to me than what I originally thought. I was just growing, expanding, realising different things about myself.
So I don't mean to be rude, but at what age were you like, okay, this relationship that I've been in for like 20 years, it's not working anymore, and I need to take this period of discernment to figure out who I am?
Yeah, great question. I was in my late 30s. I'd had a very successful corporate career. So you spend a lot of time focusing on, those 70, 80-hour weeks of doing the work, of studying university, doing all those kind of things that generally people tend to do. And you just don't take time out to have a good look at yourself until things like kids get a bit older, and those people with families would probably appreciate that. You're so busy running the treadmill, you don't get time. So it was my late 30s when I had the opportunity to take a pause, realised things weren't going the way I wanted them to. And at that point, it was also not too late. I don't think it's ever too late to make changes, but it kind of felt like it's not too late. I was still young. I still consider myself young. Maybe others wouldn't. But it was like, okay, so if I'm going to make some changes, now's the right time to do it. And so that's, I guess, why it occurred at that point in life. It was maybe just a turning point. I don't necessarily know exactly what it was, but it was just something inside said, no, things aren't going right. We've given it a good shot. We had some, like a lot of marriages do, times where we'd sort out help, it wasn't quite working right, and all that kind of jazz. But not focusing on that so much, other than we both decided that it wasn't working, went our separate ways, and hence embarking on different relationship styles to start with, because I figured that if I'm going to find out more about myself, I have to actually go out there and experience it. You can read as many books as you like, but until you get out there and experience some things in life, and I believe relationships is like that, then that's when you begin to find out what does and does not work for you.
We're going to find out a little bit more about what you found out on your journey right after this. You're on 101.9 Coast FM in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
Empty Closet Radio. Like us on Facebook.
You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. Now, joining me in the closet today is Darren Ramsay. He's been telling us all about the great journey that he embarked upon. It's a journey, it's really a journey that's inside, though, a journey of self-discovery to figure out who he was. Probably maybe a little bit later in life than some of us are going through. I know that there's certain times, like when you're young, you go through trying to figure out who you are, and you have obviously done that a little bit later in life. Now, when you started on this journey, you discovered a whole lot of things about sexuality and different sexualities, some of which we don't talk about all that much. What did you discover?
Sure. Well, the first thing I guess I realised was that I was attracted to what I knew at the time of both genders, girls and boys. And having not had the latitude to experience that when I was younger, for all sorts of family and community pressures, I didn't go there. But all of a sudden now I was in a position where I could do that and had this real passion and drive, and found myself attracted to, like I said, both genders. What I did then, which was I guess one of those pinnacle moments, was I was living away from hometown in Victoria at the time, and I had a relationship with somebody who was trans. And that really opened up my eyes and experience to what was possible. We had a great relationship, albeit very brief, but it made me realise that there was more than just this two genders for a start. There is that whole raft of possibility in that realm. So I was fortunate enough to have that experience. And so I began to identify initially as bisexual because that's what you were. I realised I wasn't gay because I was still attracted to women. I wasn't, I can't be lesbian, right? I'm biologically a guy, so that wasn't going to work, but there was this bit in the middle. All I knew was bisexual. So I subscribed to that and said, yep, that sounds like me. That's great.
Was it really important to you at the time that you did have the ability to put some words around what you were feeling?
Yeah, I felt it quite important. Now, I know labels are not important for some people, but for me, I just wanted something to be able to hang on to, I guess, and go, yeah, look, that works for me. So, for example, when I was out looking for new relationships, dating, it gave me something that I could speak to with confidence, because not knowing or not having some sort of an identity I felt made that difficult for me. Maybe not for all people.
So a few years into your journey now, do you still identify as bisexual?
No, and that's the interesting thing. Very quickly after that, and as I said, with realising there were more than just two genders out there, I had to rethink that. And I didn't even know that there was something or a label for that until once again I did a bit more research and realised that there was this term called pansexuality. Looked into that, and that fit like a glove, and to this day still does. Basically saying that there are more than two genders, so therefore, by definition and generally accepted, bisexual is attracted to two genders. Now, I appreciate there can be any two genders, not just male and female or girls and boys, but any two genders. But generally, bi means two, and I was open to much more than that. So pansexual in and of itself is where you are attracted to the individual person rather than what they identify as themselves for a gender. The catch cry for pansexuality is it's hearts, not parts. So it's less about the biology of the person and more about how you connect with them emotionally, spiritually, certainly physically, all those different elements of being attracted to a person for whom they are, not for what they seem to represent in their body and their outside cover.
And I know you just made reference then before to, obviously, you're saying there's a number of different genders. It's not just men and not just women. Do we have any words to put around any alternative genders?
Sure. In fact, that's exactly what I was writing about in the last article. So if you would have a look at the most recent FNQ magazine, you'll see that, a two-part article. So there are the common genders, where you would look at male and you look at female. The way I've described it there is it's like a spectrum, and where you've got biological male at one end and you've got biological female at the other, and you've got all this space in between where you can identify. What confuses that model, because that's oversimplistic, is then when people identify as having no gender or being gender fluid and moving along that spectrum on a day-to-day, week-to-week or year-to-year basis. There's really no rules around that. And even further to my journey was realising that there are elements of gender fluidity in myself. And that's the most recent chapter, I guess, of my own journey, is getting a handle on exactly what that means for me. And writing about it is a great way to learn, because I have to then dig deep inside to find out what it means and what it means to others as well. So there is that sliding scale. And there was a great article, not mine, written several years back and created a model called the gender bread model. And you can either Google that or have a look at last month's article that I wrote. And it introduces a model where it looks in a more complex way of gender, but it picks up on all the different things like being agender, no gender at all, being what they call NB or non-binary, so subscribing to something other than either end of the masculine and feminine spectrum.
It sounds like it's got a lot more exploring to do. We're just going to cover the very starting off, dipping our toe into this topic with you today. We've got more right after this. You're on 101.9 Coast FM in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
I was looking for some good love and good love. Say, what have I done?
Empty Closet Radio, because no one else wants to be stuck in the closet. God.
101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam, and joining me today on the glamorous balcony is Darren Ramsay, columnist for FNQ magazine, and of course in the past you've been a relationship coach. You are quite into the poly relationship scene, and we were just talking before about pansexuality. So thank you so much for spending your time on the show today. We were talking before about different words to use around gender identity. Was it important for you to put some words around your gender identity? Was it as important as putting words around your sexuality identity?
I don't believe it's as important, which is interesting because, as I mentioned previously, labels are important to some people and less so to others, and that's fine. Whatever it is perfect for you. It was important for me to have something around my sexuality, less important about gender. I'm a biological male. As I mentioned, I'm exploring what the fluidity side of that is, but wherever that lays is fine. I always identify, or at least at this point in my life, more on the masculine end of the scale anyway, and I'm just comfortable with that. I don't need to be overly descriptive on that.
And so when you talk about exploring gender fluidity side of yourself, what sorts of things are what sorts of things are we talking about really? Like, does it mean, you're cross-dressing, or is it not quite like that? I have no expectations.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult thing to kind of get a grasp on because it's so different for everybody, and a bit like sexuality, you can get my perspective and you talk to another person in the street and get a totally different point of view. So, great question from point of view. What does it mean on a practical day-by-day basis? For me, it's more around, I guess, the energetic side of it. I have a very clear view of feminine energy, and I can feel myself move into that component, which makes me feel less masculine, if you would. So, while I don't have to necessarily display that in the way I dress, although when there are certain times when I'll choose to be less masculine in my dress, but I don't go to the ends that some people do in cross-dressing or whatever. There are other ways of expressing that, but to call it what most people refer to on the street.
What about when I wear a sarong around the house all day? Does that count?
I wear a sarong around the house all day as well. Interestingly, other cultures on the planet, males wear sarongs all the time. In fact, I purchased a formal sarong when I was in Borneo a number of years ago, which was a masculine male thing. So it's actually, they have sarongs for males and sarongs for females. But I appreciate that's a little bit of a tangent.
Well, what do you think about this whole idea or this notion that we're seeing in the wider media, not just in queer media at the moment, about toxic masculinity? How is that playing into this idea of gender fluidity?
Yeah, I'm following that fairly closely, actually, because I do find it incredibly interesting. And I think, you start to dip your toe into the whole debate, and we won't do that now, but about equality and about feminism and masculinism and all that. And it's hot topic in the press. I think it's useful for those things to be brought to the attention of the general public so that at least awareness of things can be expanded, and we give ourselves permission to look beyond those things that have been the boundaries of the last 200 or 300 years. So I think it's just a debate we'll need to follow and see where it goes. I can only say it's a good thing.
And do you think that this sort of this gender fluidity has played into your journey into polyamorous relationships? Has that been would it have happened if you weren't exploring gender fluidity as well?
I think they're very two different things. If anything, it's perhaps the other way around. The whole poly side of things came about when, once again, I was back exploring and understanding where I was going and realized from that point of view, I identified as polyamorous because I'm able to feel love for more than one person at the same time. Now, without getting into the technical detail or definition of that, if you think about, okay, so I identify as pansexual, that's me, who I am and how I feel. Therefore, I can relate to people of whatever gender. From a poly point of view, one of the criteria of identifying as poly is appreciating that one person cannot satisfy all wants, needs and desires of another. If you subscribe to that and believe it to be true, then one of the things that can exist is saying, well, what if I want to experience the biological elements of male and the biological elements of female in relationship, as well as the energies? So the sexuality and gender are spread across those two different ends of the spectrum, if you would, or anybody in between. Poly fits very neatly because those who believe in that and relate that way. Don't have a problem with having multiple partners because, for example, a biological male cannot possibly give the same experience sexually or possibly gender as a biological female and vice versa. And of course, then you've got all that beautiful spectrum in between as well.
So then what happens if, like, say, for example, if I was to enter into a poly relationship with two men, for example, like we've all got the same hardware.
Yeah, and so that's why it's an example, as I said, as a pansexual, but it's not the only way, it's not the thing. In fact, there are a number of my friends, and some of them up here in Cairns are in that very scenario. They're all male by parts, they have different energies at different times, and they're living in a polyamorous relationship because that's how it works. So it really sits... So I was saying before, it's not one versus the other. It was kind of, I appreciated it was poly, and then that kind of was almost an enabler to allow me to go and explore other aspects. Didn't have to be that way. It's just the way it was in my journey.
You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. We're speaking with Darren Ramsay, who's a columnist for FNQ magazine and author of many books about relationships and sexuality.
Empty Closet Radio, facebook.com/Empty Closet Radio.
101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. We are joining Darren Ramsay is joining us in the closet. He's a columnist with FNQ magazine. Now, Darren, I'm curious to know, and I'm sure that there's other people thinking this as well, is if you're in a polyamorous relationship, how do you go about growing your family? Like, I imagine it just makes things very complicated and perhaps a little bit difficult because it's just not the way that society has set up structures.
Yeah, it can be quite difficult, although the practical side of it turns out to be fairly easy. It's something that I wrote specifically about. I wrote one of my books is called Living Free with Polyamory. And there's a chapter in there specifically about how do you tell the children, how do you bring children into the equation? Because there is certainly a belief in elements of community that polyamory is bad for children. Just the same as some elements of the community think that gay couples shouldn't have children and all those kind of misbeliefs that are out there.
Is this really similar to like the beliefs around, maybe people shouldn't get divorced if they have children? What a great reason to stay in a shitty relationship.
Possibly, and hence why I probably stayed longer than I should have way back when. So, yeah, you could say it's a bit like that. But certainly you can draw the parallels between people in alternative relationships, meaning things which are not heterosexual, straight down the middle of the road type relationships. Anything outside of that, a large chunk of the community doesn't necessarily think it's good for children. Whereas the reality is that in my entire career of being a relationship coach, and I was focusing and specializing on alternative relationships, particularly polyamorous as one of those variants, that up until very late in my career, I had never spoken to a single polyamorous family that had problem with children. It was only later in my career I found one family that had a bit of an issue. They happened to be in the US, so they weren't in Australia anyhow. Some of that was cultural, and the other part was associated with the local laws of their particular state. So that's really a bit of an oddball. But generally speaking, in my own example, I was in a relationship where one partner didn't have children, didn't want. Other partner had children already. I have children from my marriage. They weren't living with me at the time. So we brought the families together. And a very quick story about how that went down. We decided that we would need to let the children know. Now, this particular partner had 5 children ranging from 2 years old through to 21 at the time. Yeah. And it was like, how are we going to go about that? So we just basically decided we would hold a family meeting. That was normal for us. We would do that with both partners present. And at that stage, the children didn't necessarily know what the dynamic was. So we got them all together. We introduced the dynamic and spoke about it. Now, a very easy story cut short, went through and explained, yes, we're in polyamorous. And the ones that are about 15, 16 took the most interest at that point with questions and said, oh, okay. And said, so mum, that means that Darren's in a relationship with you. And it was like, yes. And also in a relationship with the other person. Yes. Okay. And that's working for you all? Yes. And so, mum, are you happy? Yes. Great. That's all I'm concerned about. And the very next comment from the 21-year-old was, so when is pizza being delivered? It was literally not even a concern. The biggest concern about breaking the news to the family was in the minds of the three adults in the relationship. The children just went about their business. The 4-year-old at the time was just delighted that they had more adults around to play with. And we're all very respectful that parenting can be a challenge, but the parenting side of it was left predominantly to the biological parents. And as happens with a lot of monogamous relationships where people split, it really doesn't change.
Were there any challenges? Like, I'm just imagining, not that I have children, but I'm imagining that, like, the conversation when you go to, like, pick up the kids from school, the other parents, like, there's quite a bit of peer pressure in that scene. What did you encounter there?
Raised eyebrows, sometimes just a smile and a nod, other times complete disgust. But at the end of the day, our experience was fortunate that the schools were advised, because these days you have to be registered as a parent with permission to collect a child if you're not the biological parent. All that was covered off, and the school just went about the business. So any of three of us were able to pick up the children. That wasn't an issue. And if anybody just give us a sideways look, well, at the end of the day, that was their issue, not ours.
Did you give them, like, a little wink and a smile back?
No, I just went about my business. That's the safest option.
You're so not as cheeky as me. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the empty closet with Andrew and Sam.
From the moment I saw you.
Empty Closet Radio, because no one wants to be stuck in the closet.
Here in the empty closet with Andrew and Sam. Joining us in the closet tonight is Darren Ramsay. You have been telling us all about poly relationships, and I am fascinated to know, how does this idea of being in a poly relationship complicate meeting people to have a relationship with?
It can be quite challenging. I'll just put it right out there. What I tend to do is meet a person for whom they are and just see firstly if you've got a connection. My dating model is perhaps a little bit different to what some people are, but then I'm a little bit older in life as well, and I've experienced all that stuff of being a teenager and in your 20s where everything's got to happen straight away. I'm a little bit more relaxed about it. So realistically, I just get to know a person. Poly's not the kind of thing where you walk up to somebody in a crowd, shake their hand and say, "G'day, I'm Darren, I'm polyamorous." It's just not what you do. For a start, people wouldn't understand. They'd think you've got some sort of condition that maybe there's a treatment for, or they just wouldn't get it. So like any relationship, it's about, for a successful relationship, it's about building rapport, building a connection, finding out if you've got some resonance or see eye to eye with the person that you're meeting with. If so, then certainly I would go to a first date, set a coffee meeting, or whatever it is that you would normally do as if you're in a monogamous relationship. Relationships don't change at that early stage. However, the difference being that very early in that first date, I would, in the flow of conversation, identify that I was polyamorous, and how I'd go about that is just letting them know that I do actually have another partner. That partner is aware that I'm here. I have a blessing to be present with whatever we're doing, and also that give them a little bit of a heads up about what poly is if they don't understand. The biggest issue they have, I have found, is that people will immediately jump to thinking that you're cheating. Right? And there is cheating in poly. It can absolutely happen. But when you explain to them that, look, in fact, my other partner or partners are aware that I am here having this coffee meet with you or whatever it is, if you get that raised eyebrow, say, look, here, look, let's just send a text and let them know. The person's name is, XYZ. We'll just send them that and get the feedback. That's all okay. So it takes a little bit more work and a bit more effort, but I find the single element that matters is just being authentic to who you are and remaining integrity to who you are. Those two things, your authenticity and your integrity, tend to speak volumes, and it's not something you say with words, it's something you say with your entire body. People look in your eyes and they can tell generally if you're telling lies, and the whole persona comes across as being genuine, and I find that that's part of the key to it. If you are cheating and you're calling it polyamory, you get caught out real quick.
So, are there like clear delineated lines around like what is cheating in a polyamorous relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, most people in a poly relationship will have some type of rules, or what we just simply call agreements. And in fact, that was something I encouraged when I was coaching people to set their boundary conditions, set what was right or wrong.
Are these sorts of boundaries and agreements and conditions, are these not the sorts of things that, like, even if you're not in a poly relationship, shouldn't you like think about these anyway?
Precisely. In fact, some people, when I was relationship coaching, I didn't deal just with that. I dealt with some people that were also in just normal monogamous relationships. Nothing wrong with that either. And yeah, it's a really good thing in a relationship to have the maturity to sit down and have a conversation about what you want and what you don't. Most people just don't do that. In poly, you're kind of forced to, in a way, because as we say, there's nowhere to hide. If you're in a poly relationship, there are more eyes looking over you, what you're doing, and rightly so. And so if you're trying to do something that's not quite right, you'll soon get caught out. The bit where it kind of works with polyamory is some agreements are quite formal, they're written, some are just by word of mouth. Remembering, of course, poly is a form of an open relationship. So perhaps some people are more aware of things like swing, which is purely recreational sex. Polyamory, by the way, is a relationship where you do want heart connection. So it's not just about sex. It's about the whole experience of a relationship. In fact, one of my partners said it best years ago when she said it's a relationship, multiple relationships with strings attached. Yeah? Great way of describing it. But people would identify that, yeah, swingers, they have rules around what they can't and can do with another person. Poly's a bit the same. Of course, it's a little bit more relaxed because you are forming a full relationship. But if you go outside of the rules, then potentially you're cheating.
It sounds like, it sounds very similar to what straight people do. Dare I say, like, straight people in the standard kind of heterosexual monogamous relationship, there's like, they don't have to have that conversation because it's almost like society has spent thousands of years writing this invisible rule book for us.
And in some ways that is true, yet you find people that are struggling with that model can benefit from actually sitting down and having that conversation. Because while it's great for society to write the invisible rules, it's not a one-size-fits-all. I mean, how many relationships do you know, Andrew, where one set of rules applies to the entire community, that is right for everybody? It just doesn't exist, and hence part of the problems we have. But I digress, because that's really something, I guess, is a bigger topic in its own right.
Absolutely is. We'll be back right after this here on 101.9 Coast FM.
Empty Closet Radio, 9 p.m. Tuesdays, 101.9 Coast FM.
101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. Now, Darren is joining us. He's a columnist for FNQ magazine and, as I've discovered, author and relationship coach. Well, ex-relationship coach, is that right?
Yeah, moving to Cairns, lifestyle change, career change. It was great. I was able to help many hundreds of people over the time, but it was just time for something different for me.
Everyone on this show has done career changes, don't you worry. So we've been talking a lot about having a poly relationship. If someone's listening and they say, oh, this sounds like it might be kind of something interesting that I would be interested to find out more about, what are the safe ways that you can find out more information or find out some good information about it?
Sure, and there is, like a lot of topics, there is good information on the internet, there is bad information on the internet, it's where people tend to go first. But what you'll find is the states in Australia, they'll all have support groups for different community segments, and polyamory is no different. Pansexuality is no different, although I should say sexuality, because you won't find a pansexual support group necessarily, or they might be out there somewhere. If anybody knows, I'd certainly be interested in finding out. But from a polyamory point of view and those alternative relationship types, there are relationship coaches out there now. There were very few when I began, but there are now quite a number of them out there who can help. There is some very good information on the internet, but I tend to head for something like Polyamory Australia. There is a website for that. that you can get information. There are polyamorous groups on social media like Facebook, and I tend to look for those that are closer to your community rather than maybe something off in Europe and the US for Australians. Let's go and look at what's local. It's just a little bit more culturally correct.
So is it a really big scene here?
Well, I don't know about scene's the right word, but is it a popular relationship style? When I was coaching and doing the research on it, it's certainly not anywhere near the numbers that you'll find of people in other relationship styles. It is less, but growing. And the problem is we don't know what the firm statistics are because a lot of people just simply won't talk about it.
Yeah, it's not like disclosed, and it's not a question on the census. We've fought for years and years to get the question about what's the gender of your partner put onto the census. So I'm not surprised at all. There's no questions about, are you in a poly relationship by any chance? So there's some good resources for finding more about poly relationships and how to kind of explore that safely. What about if you're thinking about sexuality stuff and like you were saying earlier about taking some time to really figure out who you are with your relationship style and your sexuality? What are the sort of safe ways that you can explore what that might look like for you?
Sure. I think one of the key points for people, and for some people it's very difficult, is these things. Slow down and have patience. Get to know a person as a person first. I mentioned that before when I was talking about my own experience. I think a lot of people tend to rush in, and in so doing don't have necessarily all the conversations they should have. They don't always know where they are at.
But I totally know what I want. I'm not the rushing in type. I'm so sure that I want to date an underwear model who worships the ground that I walk on.
Then you go where those people hang. I mean, it's no different.
I'm still looking for that, by the way.
Yeah, and by the way, Andrew, if I ever find those people, I'll just let you know. So, but in terms of getting back to your question, the safe ways of doing things, it's just think of what you would do if you're doing any kind of dating. You know, let people know where you are. Don't go to places that feel a bit shady. Go, meet in public. All those things that we've been taught as children for monogamous relationships apply to polyamorous relationships and any other alternate relationship. And when it comes to sexuality, I think it's a bit like, how do you safely come out? It's going to be different for everybody. But if you're looking to have a relationship with somebody and date, sexuality is only one component, and you know what you want. You want somebody who's an underwear model. Somebody might want somebody who is pansexual. It's part of your criteria. You kind of go where those people hang, try and find out, take your time to do that. There's no magic recipe, there's no panacea or silver bullet. It's just getting out there and meeting people. In Cairns, we have some amazing resources in terms of functions we can go to. There are the parties, there are the different events we can go to. There's Tropical Pride every year here. Probably Cairns, from my experience, is one of the most easiest communities to mingle into. I've only been here just over a year, and the very first weekend I moved up to Cairns was the weekend that that year's Mardi Gras ran. I just went along, began to meet people. Easy conversations. Don't jump at it. Just meet people for who they are.
And that was totally where you met me. You're like, who is this guy? Who is this dude who's doing a whole bunch of stuff? He's got a clipboard. He looks important. Thank you so much for coming onto the show, Darren. This is pretty much all we have time for on this occasion. I'm sure you will be back into the empty closet sooner rather than later. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the empty closet with Andrew and Sam.
Hey, Melody. Every night you play me something sweet.
Empty Closet Radio. Follow us on Twitter.
Let me hear your love sing.
101.9 Coast FM. You're in the empty closet with Andrew and Sam. Now that's pretty much all we have time for. If you'd like to listen back to any of the interview today, make sure that you do check out our podcast. You can listen to today's show, but you can also listen back to any of the shows that we've done previously. We've got hundreds of them up there. So make sure you check that out. Just open up your podcasting app. So get out your smartphone, search for podcasts, and then search for Empty Closet Radio. You'll see us there, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be kept up to date with all of our latest shows as they appear. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the empty closet with Andrew and Sam.
Don't want no low fidelity, don't want nobody somebody telling me yes.
Thanks for listening to The Empty Closet, brought to you by 1019 Coast FM Cairns.